Welcome. Today we're going to discuss the technique circling wing and some of the more important principles, concepts, rules, theories, and strategies of the technique. So let's start out like we normally do in this video and talk about the strategy. The strategy is pretty simple. We're dealing with an attack from our obscure zone, so we want to step to a zone where we can start seeing our opponent and counter it. But as Kenpoists, we like to make things more sophisticated. So let's actually get into it because it's a lot more complex than it seems. So let's start out with their attack. We're dealing with a major, in this case, an applied major, and we have to start dealing with this immediately. This is going to take consideration number one, because this could potentially cause death. But before we get into that, let's talk about the obscurity. If you notice, they're in our obscure zone. Well, that means we can't see them. But this brings in the concept of eyeless sight. They've made contact with us. So because they've made contact, I know where they are. So we can take advantage of them. So let's take into account our rules. We have a general rule that says step away from the unknown. Why? Well, because this is unknown. We don't know what's here. We don't know what's behind us. So we want to step to places where we can see our environment, in this case, to the front. So taking all in that into account, let's actually do the first move and establish our base, because that's rule number one. But we're going to do it slightly different than we normally do. Remember what I said. We're dealing with a choke. So this takes precedence. We want to start affecting this before we start establishing our base. So simultaneously, we're going to shrug our shoulders so we can start grabbing our opponent as we begin to establish our base. But let's talk about it a little bit more, because we're not just establishing our base and grabbing their hands. Remember, we have rules. We're trying to obey as many of those rules as we can to flip the roles. So going from a disadvantaged position to an advantage position. So how do we do that? Well, we have a rule that says check off loose extremities. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the shrug. So it's not just to alleviate the choke, but to keep control of their weapons. If we were to step to establish our base without controlling their hands, well, notice what just happened. I lost contact with them. I don't know where they are. I don't know where their hands are. So this is not really helpful for us. So the idea is to be able to pull them with us so that we know where they are at all times while we start getting into a better position. In other words, getting the upper hand, both physically and conceptually. So how are we doing it physically? Well, if you notice what we did, we put our hands in their obscure zone. So we're using weapon obscurity or object obscurity. In this case, our body is obstructing our weapon from their sight so that we can take advantage of it. In this case, by breaking off the grip with our elbow and then maintaining that grab using our arm so we can create this frictional pull into our follow-up maneuver. Why? Well, remember what I said earlier. Checking off loose extremities. If we don't do the pull, we're just going to be trading punches. I don't want to trade punches. We want to take the advantage. So the idea is to pull him to close off his weapon while enhancing our weapon, because we're using a minor. Remember, majors, minors. In this case, I want to enhance my minor by using that opposing forces, getting this pull so we can deliver the strike. Now keep in mind that this brings in the concept of the formulation equation. We can alter or change weapons. We can change the eye poke to a heel pump or a punch, or we can even change the target of where we're actually hitting. But now that we did this, let's move on to the final maneuver, or the follow-up maneuvers. In this case, we're going to be pushing the arm down so that we can take advantage of the open-ended triangle and countering, reversing our motion so we can hit with the elbow. What we don't want to do here is to start an orbit that's going to re-orbit back to hit us. So in other words, I don't want to send this weapon into orbit, but rather, just like we used the opposing forceps using depth, we want to now use it height. So the idea is here, I want to push him down so I can start hitting him up. Now let's talk about our final maneuver, because this is actually a little bit more complex. The idea here is that I don't want to walk away from what I'm hitting. So I don't want to do this as we deliver our strike. Why? Well, for one, reach. I might not have the reach because everything is going in this direction. Two, I'm not in a good position where if he was continuing to come towards me, where I'm able to defend myself. So rather than doing that, the idea is to use directional harmony to hit our opponent. So the way we're going to break it down is not necessarily the way we're going to execute it, and we'll get into that as we continue. Once we hit, the way to think about this is that we want to have proper alignment so that we can deliver everything using directional harmony. But notice that starts creating the and then. Also, it could be potentially a pass line. If you notice what I'm doing, I am creating a pass line that my opponent can start taking advantage of. Keep in mind, If you just hit this opponent and he's able to do this, we don't have to continue. Again, using the formulation equation, we just delete the end and cross out and cover. We don't have to continue to engage. But sticking to the ideal phase, the idea here is that we're going to be using continuity of motion rather than doing it by the numbers. In other words, I don't want to align my weapon and then execute it, 1 and then 2. Rather, I want to continue the execution so that the alignment happens while I'm doing the maneuver, and then I finish everything as I settle to deliver the strike. Now, like a lot of our techniques, we're left in the middle of the fight. This is for you to decide if you need to continue hitting the opponent, or in our case, we're just simply going to cross out and cover. So now that we talked about the rules, concepts, principles, and theories, let's actually execute it once fairly slow so you can see it done. Up. We hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system a little bit better. Thank you very much.